Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're peeling back the layers on what might be one of history's most consequential moments.
But one that almost nobody talks about.
Exactly. It gets glossed over in, your standard history class, yet it fundamentally guaranteed the survival of the French Revolution. We're giving you a shortcut to being really well informed about a battle that it reshaped Europe. We are plunging into the Battle of Valmy, fought in September of 1792. And look, before this battle, the revolution was this really precarious, volatile national experiment.
Could have gone either way.
Totally. But after Valmy, it became this unstoppable world-altering force.
And that transformation is precisely our focus today. We've really dug into the sources to understand why Valmy wasn't just a military success. It was an ideological and political pivot point.
Okay.
So our mission is to analyze what made this moment possible and, why it allowed the revolutionary movement to continue its radical transformation of France.
And to really grasp the gravity of Valmy, we have to start with the climate right before the battle. Late summer 1792, the situation in Paris was beyond dire.
To put it mildly.
You've got the September massacres happening internally, and then externally, the other European powers are finally making their move. What exactly were the stakes?
The stakes were the immediate extinction of the revolution. It's that simple.
Wow.
This wasn't just some border skirmish. The French revolutionary forces were facing a full-on invading coalition, spearheaded by the powerful, veteran Prussian army.
And they had Austrian troops with them too, right? And French royalists.
Yes, exactly. And the coalition's intentions, well, they couldn't have been clearer.
This is the Brunswick Manifesto we're talking about.
It's the one, issued just a month earlier, and it explicitly stated that if the revolutionaries harmed the French royal family, Paris would face, and this is a quote, military execution and total subversion.
So zero sum. Surrender or be destroyed.
Absolutely. The Prussian commander, the Duke of Brunswick, he fully expected to just march triumphantly into Paris. I mean, he was leading the legacy of Frederick the Great's army.
The best in Europe.
The most professional, most successful military machine in Europe. So Valmy was, it was literally the last defensive line before Paris fell, the last thing standing in the ways of the monarchy being restored and the revolution being crushed.
Okay, so if the Prussian army was the gold standard, how on earth did the revolutionary forces, which, from what I understand, were disorganized, politically fractured, often low on supplies, how did they manage to hold them off?
Yeah, let's unpack this supposed miracle.
Because on paper, it looks impossible.
It does, and the initial reality on the ground absolutely favored the invaders. The French army was going through this massive, chaotic reorganization. Our sources highlight that they were a mix of old professional Royal Army regiments.
The Lignards.
The Lignards, yes. Okay. Mixed with these huge masses of raw, enthusiastic, but totally undisciplined revolutionary volunteers.
Right, the amalgam. I read about that. Short on training, but just overflowing with ideological fervor.
You got it. So the battle wasn't some tactical masterpiece of French maneuvering. It was a desperate defensive stand.
So what were the specific factors then? How did this inexperienced force under Dumouriez and Kellermann actually succeed? Well, Valmy was less about brilliant infantry charges and much more about two crucial factors: artillery and attrition. Artillery first. What was special about theirs?
The French artillery was excellent. I mean, truly top-notch for the era. They used what's called the Grubelval system, which gave them a real technical edge. And their commanders, they strategically placed their guns on the ridges of the Valmy plain.
So they had the high ground.
They had the high ground, and it allowed them to just pound the Prussians as they advanced. It was really more of an artillery duel than a classic infantry battle.
Okay, so not a lot of hand-to-hand fighting.
Very little. The sheer weight of the French cannon fire, especially in the middle of the day, it convinced Brunswick that a head-on assault would be way too costly. And that brings us to the second, and an arguably more critical factor.
Which is?
The Prussians were collapsing internally long before the battle even really got going.
The logistical nightmare.
Yes. The weather and their supply lines were just devastating the coalition. It had been raining nonstop. The roads were pure mud, making it impossible to move supply wagons.
And they were getting sick.
Critically sick. The sources are clear on this. Dysentery, the bloody flux, was absolutely ravaging the Prussian troops. They were sick, they were starving, and they were exhausted.
So by the time they even got to Valmy, they were in no shape for a real fight.
None at all. This is that hidden knowledge nugget, right? Yeah. The decisive battle was essentially won by mud and disease before it even started, just compounded by that effective French artillery. The Prussian retreat wasn't really a tactical choice. It was a necessity.
They had to withdraw because the army was just decaying.
That's exactly right. The battle itself was more of a long cannonade, a few feints. Brunswick never truly committed his full force. But then you have that famous moment.
Kellermann with his hat.
Kellermann raises his hat on his sword and shouts, "Vive la nation!" Long live the nation. And the French volunteers, under heavy fire, they just stand firm. They don't break.
And the Prussians saw that.
They saw an enemy that was supposed to break and run, standing their ground, shouting defiance. And for the already weakened Prussians, that psychological impact was profound. That resilience secured the victory.
So that success, just holding the line and forcing the retreat, it didn't just save Paris geographically.
No.
It gave this incredible morale boost to the revolutionary government back in Paris. A psychological win that was essential for their future.
Absolutely essential.
Let's use that psychological security as our bridge then. Because if the military success was the trigger, the political earthquake that followed is, well, it's the real world-changing story here. What was the immediate political fallout in the National Convention?
The connection is, it's immediate, it's direct, and it is incredibly fast. The news of the Prussian retreat reaches Paris almost at the exact same moment that the new legislative body, the National Convention, is being formed.
And this convention was much more radical than the one it replaced, right?
Much more. Dominated by the Girondins and the Jacobins. So the victory didn't just boost morale, it provided what they saw as irrefutable proof.
Proof that their project, the revolution, was, what, sanctioned by history or something?
Precisely. It extinguished that immediate existential threat of a foreign invasion, and that empowered the most radical political elements. They no longer had to hedge their bets.
Right. The fear of a Bourbon restoration was suddenly off the table, at least for a moment.
Temporarily neutralized, yes. And with that threat gone, the convention felt confident enough to act on this deep internal desire to abolish the monarchy entirely.
And this is where the timeline just becomes stunning.
It really is. Think about this. On September 20th, 1792, the cannons fire at Valmy. The very next day, September 21st, the National Convention formally abolishes the French monarchy.
Wow. One day.
And then on September 22nd, they declare the First French Republic. You could literally say the Republic was born on the same battlefield where the Prussians were forced to retreat.
That immediacy just, it underscores how central the military outcome was. The victory at Valmy gave them the moral and practical authority they needed to just tear down a 1,000-year-old system.
It's not just a change of government. It's a foundational shift in the entire concept of sovereignty in Europe.
And this leads to the symbolic significance, right? Valmy becomes this ultimate symbol of the citizen soldier.
Yes, it was immediately seen as a miraculous turning point. It proved that a nation defending its own liberty could defeat the old professional armies of tyranny. The French idea of nationhood was now intrinsically linked to defending the Republic.
So this wasn't just a win, it was like its birth certificate, stained with gunpowder.
That's a great way to put it. It proved the revolutionary ideal could withstand the test of fire. The political experiment was not going to be some brief, failed uprising. It was now cemented as the state structure.
And that confidence, born from Valmy, is what fueled everything that came next.
Exactly. The terror, the execution of the king, the massive pushback against counter-revolutionaries, none of those radical steps could have been politically justified or militarily sustained without Valmy.
Okay, so let's zoom out to the long view. Valmy happens in 1792. The next 2 decades of European history are just defined by massive conflict. What did this moment mean for the world beyond just declaring the Republic? What's its enduring legacy?
Well, the long-term impact is truly enormous. I mean, think about it. Had the coalition won the European status quo, it probably would have been maintained.
The old order would have held?
It would have held, maybe with some minor adjustments. But by allowing the revolution to survive and radicalize, Valmy guaranteed France would continue its transformation and eventually export those ideas by force.
So you're saying Valmy basically set the stage for all the revolutionary wars that then evolved into the Napoleonic campaigns?
That's precisely the implication the sources draw. The victory solidified the concept of the levée en masse conscription.
Because if these citizen armies could beat veteran Prussians,
then raising huge armies of ideologically motivated citizens was the military future of France. This introduced a scale of warfare that Europe had simply never seen before. It wasn't just saving the Republic, it fundamentally changed how war itself was waged.
moving from the small professional armies of the 18th century to the mass mobilization of the 19th.
Absolutely. The sources confirm that this victory set the stage for subsequent revolutionary and Napoleonic campaigns in Europe. Without the survival guaranteed at Valmy, there's no directory, no consulate, and certainly no meteoric rise of Napoleon Bonaparte.
His entire career was built on the zeal of that revolutionary expansion.
It was. Valmy initiated the chain of events that would see French ideas about nationalism, law, and sovereignty spread across the entire continent.
And this is the ultimate aha moment that connects back to the start of our deep dive, the way historians weigh the importance of Valmy. The sources place its significance in seriously elite company.
They do. The significance of Valmy's enduring influence is compared specifically to Salamis or Waterloo.
And that is a powerful statement.
It's huge. Salamis secured the future of Greek democracy over Persian imperial rule. Waterloo ended 2 decades of Napoleon and redefined the European balance of power for a century. Valmy is put right alongside them.
Because it secured an ideology.
Exactly. It secured the radical Republican ideology at the precise moment it was most vulnerable. It wasn't the largest battle, not by a long shot. It wasn't even the bloodiest, but it was the one that determined the political shape of the entire following century. It shifted the foundation of European power.
Away from monarchical legitimacy and toward popular sovereignty.
So if we synthesize all this, Valmy's real power isn't just in its tactics, it's in the dual nature of its success. It was a necessary military defense, sure, but it was combined with this profound symbolic victory that gave authority to the radicals.
And secured the political will needed to establish the First French Republic.
That's the core of it. So the ultimate knowledge nugget we want to leave with you, the listener, is this. The logistical weaknesses of the Prussian army, combined with that effective French artillery, it gave the revolutionary forces just enough space to survive one crucial day, September 20th, 1792. And that survival led directly to the establishment of the Republic. It redefined European warfare, and it shaped international politics for decades to come.
And given that comparison the sources make to battles like Salamis and Waterloo, it really raises a fascinating question for you to think about.
How often does a battle that is neither the largest, the most famous, nor the most decisive in purely military terms prove to be the single most consequential pivot point in world history? All because it secured the continuation of a radical idea at its most fragile moment. Makes you wonder, what small, unnoticed defensive actions today might be securing the trajectory of history tomorrow? Something to mull over until our next deep dive.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going back to 1792, to a really critical moment in the French Revolution. We're zeroing in on a single battle, Valmy, fought on September 20th. Now, when you think of a history-changing battle, you probably picture, these huge bloody clashes. Valmy it was the exact opposite. This was a fight defined by strategy, by position, and, believe it or not, by the power of sound. So our mission today is to dig into the sources and figure out this paradox. How did a relatively small engagement with very few casualties managed to save the entire French Revolution right when it was on the verge of collapse?
It's a fascinating case study, it really is, because the sources make it clear this wasn't just some lucky accident for the French. This was a moment where the, let's say, raw revolutionary spirit met the disciplined might of the Prussian army. And the core insight really is that this was a victory of technology, specifically artillery and just perfect tactical positioning.
Absolutely. And we're going to get into the weeds on that. We'll be looking at the makeup of the French forces, the critical high ground they took near Valmy, and the technological edge their cannons gave them. If you want to understand how this new republic managed to survive its first major test, you really have to understand the nitty-gritty of that day.
And to set the stage, you have to appreciate the stakes. I mean, late 1792, this was probably the most fragile moment for the revolution. The monarchy was gone, and the other European powers were terrified. They thought this revolutionary idea would spread, so they formed a coalition to crush it, thinking France was just collapsing into chaos and was ripe for an invasion.
And the main force marching on Paris was this coalition army, led by the Duke of Brunswick. Now, the whole coalition was huge, maybe 84,000 troops if you count everyone, but the force that mattered at Valmy was about 34,000 professional Prussian soldiers. And these guys were considered the best in Europe. Incredibly disciplined, incredibly well-trained.
Right. And facing them, you had a French force of about 36,000. So the numbers are roughly equal. But the quality That's a different story. The French were a volatile mix, and their defense depended entirely on two commanders, General Dumouriez and General Kellermann, managing to bring their armies together at just the right moment to block the Prussian advance. A real strategic masterstroke.
Let's unpack that French army, because this is where it gets really interesting. It wasn't your typical professional army. You had this core of experienced regulars left over from the old royal army. These were men who, chose to side with the revolution. They brought the discipline.
And that discipline was absolutely essential because their ranks were, you could say, watered down by these new volunteer battalions, the patriots as the sources call them. These guys had incredible revolutionary spirit. I mean, they were fighting for the nation, not for a king. But let's be honest, passion doesn't always win battles. They were poorly trained and, frankly, prone to panic.
So that's the tension right there. You have this fragile force. What made it hold together? And it seems to boil down to two things: their position and their technology. They grabbed the high ground, a ridge near the village of Valmy. They had the slope.
That terrain advantage was everything. It meant any Prussian attack had to come uphill, across open, muddy ground. It slows you down, it breaks your formation. But more than that, the ridge let the French play their trump card, their artillery.
And this is where we get into the tech. We keep saying superior artillery, but we should name it. We're talking about the Windmill system.
Yes, this was an innovation from decades earlier, but it had totally revolutionized French cannons.
So what's so special about it?
In a word, standardization. Before Windmill, cannons were all sort of unique, different sizes, different ammunition. Windmill standardized the guns, the carriages, the ammunition, everything.
And why does that matter so much at Valmy?
It means faster, more efficient resupply. But more importantly, the cannons themselves were better. They had better sights, they were on lighter carriages so you could move them faster, and they could maintain a higher rate of accurate fire.
When you're on the defense, just being able to keep firing is, well, it's everything.
And Kellermann, the French commander, he knew exactly how to use this. There's a brilliant detail in the sources. He ordered an old windmill on the ridge to be torn down.
Why the windmill?
It was a perfect landmark, an obvious spotting position for the Prussian artillery. By removing it, he denied them that advantage, helping to conceal his own gun placements.
That's fascinating. A tiny decision that shows how much thought went into this defense before a single shot was even fired. They were controlling the battlefield. So with the stage set, the battle begins. And it's not what you'd expect. Valmy wasn't about infantry charges. It was basically a long-range artillery duel that went on for hours, a battle of cannons and nerves.
Exactly. The Prussians moved forward, trying to test the French line. But they were just hammered by this relentless, accurate fire from the ridge. The slope gave the French gunners a clear advantage, firing down into them.
And this is where that power of sound idea really comes into play. It wasn't just the cannonballs causing damage. Imagine the psychological effect. You have these standardized, well-drilled gun crews firing non-stop from a fortified position above you. The sheer volume, the consistency of the barrage, it would have been deafening. A wall of sound designed to shatter your morale.
It's total sensory overload. And the veteran French gunners, they held their nerve. They kept up this terrifying, steady rhythm. So for the Prussians, even these elite soldiers trying to advance into that noise, that smoke, that constant fire, that position must have seemed unbreakable.
You mentioned the veteran gunners holding their nerve, but what about the volunteer infantry behind them? Weren't they the ones who were supposed to panic? How did Kellermann stop that from happening?
That's a fantastic question, and it really gets to the heart of his leadership that day. The sources say that during the worst of it, the infantry were tense, but they held the line. Kellermann apparently rode his horse up and down the line, taking off his hat and shouting, "Vive la nation! Long live the nation!"
So it's more than just a cheer.
Much more, it was a rallying cry. It reminded those volunteers exactly why they were standing there, taking that fire. It was a way to channel all that revolutionary passion into actual battlefield discipline. It connected the new recruits to the old hands.
And that display of resolve from the gunners and from the infantry must have been what the Duke of Brunswick saw from the other side.
It had to be. He's looking up at that ridge through all the smoke, and he sees an army that isn't breaking. He hears that continuous, accurate cannon fire, and he has to do the math. It was a purely pragmatic decision. An assault up that hill into those guns would have cost him thousands of his best men, a price he just couldn't justify. So his advance, as one source puts it, became a cautious and ultimately aborted advance. He backed off.
And the proof is in the casualty numbers. I mean, they're almost unbelievable for a battle this important. Around 300 French losses, and only about 200 for the Prussians. This wasn't a military defeat for the Prussians in the traditional sense. It was a strategic one. They were deterred.
The low numbers hide the enormous significance. Brunswick realized he couldn't get to Paris. The French defense, built on artillery and terrain, made it impossible. So his army, still mostly intact, began this long, humiliating retreat back to the Rhine.
And that's the moment. That's the takeaway. Valmy stopped the invasion dead in its tracks.
It did. It saved the revolution. It gave the new government time to organize, time to build a real national army. If Brunswick's army had broken through, if they'd marched into Paris in September 1792, the French Republic would have been over before it even really began. Valmy gave it a fighting chance.
So when we boil it all down, the success at Valmy was this incredible mix. You had the discipline of the old Royal Army regulars,
mixed with the spirit of the new revolutionary volunteers.
Right. And you combine that with the smart use of high ground and the simply better technology of their Gribeauval artillery. It forces a strategic retreat instead of a bloody, costly fight.
It does. And it leaves you with a thought that goes way beyond this one battle. How often in history are the most important victories decided not by who has more soldiers, but by who has a smarter technological edge? Or, who simply understands the terrain better. Think about how that combination of the disciplined soldiers and the revolutionary fervor and superior cannons created something much stronger than the sum of its parts.
A stunning moment where professionalism and passion came together to secure a future. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Battle of the Cannons. We'll see you next time. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are focusing on one of those moments in history where everything just hangs in the balance. The entire future of a political movement resting on a single morning, a few key decisions, and this absolute need for cooperation. We're going to be zeroing in on 1792, the critical showdown known as the Battle of Valmy. And look, we aren't here to just rehash the textbook version. Our mission for this deep dive is a lot more focused, I think a lot more fascinating. We really want to understand the command synergy between two key figures, Generals François-Christophe de Kellermann and Charles-François Dumouriez. The source material gives us this incredibly clear dissection of their specific roles, this sort of division of labor they engineered to stop the Prussian-led coalition. And in doing so, they basically saved the French Revolution.
And we have to say up front, you are going to hear these names a lot. Kellermann and Dumouriez.
They are a bit of a mouthful, aren't they?
No, they are. But it's so important you remember them because their coordination, it represents a genuine historical inflection point. The stakes were just immediate and existential. This coalition, led by the Duke of Brunswick, backed by the full might of Prussia, was marching straight for Paris.
And they weren't subtle about their intentions.
Not at all. Their goal was explicit. Crush the revolution, restore the monarchy, and just end this new republic before it could even, take its first breath. If they had managed to punch through the French defenses, the entire political transformation that followed, the rise of the republic, the new legal codes, the whole course of European political thought, it all would have been aborted. So when we analyze this battle, what we're really analyzing are the tactical decisions that saved an idea.
Okay, so let's get into this high-stakes meeting of minds. The invading force was highly trained, highly respected. It must have put immense pressure on the new, less experienced French forces. It seems obvious that fighting piecemeal would have just been suicide. So why was cooperation so necessary? What was the spark that brought them together?
The necessity really just came down to sheer survival. The French armies, they had revolutionary spirit for sure, but they weren't yet this consolidated professional force like the Prussians. To even have a chance, they needed superiority in numbers and in position, and that meant one thing: consolidation.
Right.
The sources really point to Dumouriez's strategic maturity here. He had the overall command in the area, and his first, most crucial move was realizing he couldn't hold the line alone.
So Dumouriez is the one who initiates this whole unified effort. He makes the first call.
Precisely. His critical first action was to actively summon Kellermann's army of the center to come and reinforce his own army of the north. And this wasn't just a casual invitation, it was a firm directive, really born out of absolute necessity.
Okay.
Dumouriez knew that his own forces, which were positioned in the Argonne Forest, could maybe harass the Prussians, but they couldn't stop them. Not definitively. Kellermann's army provided the weight, the mass that was needed to form a true, immovable defensive line.
That initial act itself, just recognizing you need help and then acting on it, that's a huge lesson right there.
It is.
It shows that the first step to victory in a crisis is often just overcoming that instinct to go it alone.
Yeah.
And instead initiating collaboration.
Absolutely. And while Kellermann was on the move, which is a whole complicated process in itself, Dumouriez was already coordinating the big picture, the overall defensive framework. He was kind of the conductor, identifying the critical ground, defining the defensive posture, and making sure that when Kellermann showed up, there was a clear spot for him in the plan.
Now, once Kellermann's forces actually arrived, and the sources do hint there was a little bit of tension, or at least a need to clarify the chain of command, how did they divide the field? How do two experienced generals split up the work on the battlefield?
That's a crucial point, and it's one that often gets glossed over. There was definitely potential for a clash of egos. But Valmy worked because they defined complementary roles. They were based on their expertise and really on the terrain itself. Dumouriez, as the strategic commander, he kept his focus on the broad strategy, holding the critical paths, the defiles, to his left and center.
So he's making sure the Prussians can't just go around them.
Exactly. He's maintaining the overall structural integrity of the defense.
And Kellermann, where does he fit into this grid?
Kellermann was given the specialist role. He was focused entirely on the right wing of the combined forces. His tactical mission was basically defined by the geography right in front of him, specifically this plateau just south of the village of Valmy.
Oh, okay.
And this brings us to a really critical detail the sources all emphasize. Kellermann didn't just line his troops up in a field. He immediately put them on the elevated terrain overlooking the road to Paris.
The high ground.
The high ground. It was absolutely essential.
So help us understand why that plateau was so decisive. I mean, it sounds simple. High ground is good. But in 18th century warfare, why couldn't the Prussians just climb up and fight them?
Because in 1792, elevated terrain was the ultimate force multiplier, especially for the asset the French were about to use, their artillery.
The cannons.
For infantry, sure, high ground gives you visibility, maybe an advantage in a bayonet charge. But for cannons, it's everything. Putting the guns on that plateau gave them a massive advantage in range in what's called plunging fire. It means your cannonballs hit the enemy lines at a steeper angle, causing more damage. And maybe even more importantly, it makes the enemy's return fire, their counter battery fire, far less accurate. They have to shoot uphill.
I see.
So Kellermann was managing this specialized asset, the high ground, for maximum impact. Meanwhile, Dumouriez was just focused on keeping the overall line locked down. Their synergy was this perfect blend of strategic oversight and tactical specialization.
Okay, so this is where the story shifts from just positioning to sheer force. The battle itself is famous not for a cavalry charge or some big infantry brawl, but for something much more industrialized, terrifying, really, the cannonade. The sources all point to Kellermann's management of the artillery as the decisive factor. How did he pull it off?
That's right. The battle was basically a 9-hour artillery duel, and Kellermann's execution was, well, it was brilliant because of its discipline and its restraint. The Prussian forces advanced, they deployed for battle, and they were clearly expecting the French, who they saw as, green revolutionary troops, to panic, to break formation or launch some kind of rash attack.
But he didn't take the bait. He held them back.
He did. And this is the mark of a great tactical commander, knowing when not to move. Kellermann held his infantry in these tight defensive squares. He minimized their risk. He avoided costly close-quarters combat, and instead just focused everything on this relentless, sustained artillery bombardment from the plateau.
So this wasn't just occasional firing. This was a storm.
It was a concentrated deluge of iron. It was designed to do one thing: break the enemy's will. And the French artillery itself was a key factor, too. They were using the Duel system, which was famous. It standardized their cannons and made them more accurate, more mobile than most of their rivals.
So better tech, better position.
Better tech in the perfect position.
Yeah.
Kellermann had turned his entire right wing into an impenetrable fortress of fire.
It sounds like the French basically created a kill zone that the Prussians had to walk into if they wanted to get to Paris. Mm-hmm. What did that do to these seasoned Prussian veterans?
Psychologically, it was devastating. The Prussian forces, you have to remember, were professional, they were disciplined, but they were not used to this kind of accurate, prolonged artillery fire, especially not from an army they held in contempt. The cannonade caused heavy casualties, severe disruption. It shattered their confidence and it shattered their formations. The Prussian commander, Brunswick, he saw his veteran columns just getting shaken to their core. The sources say that even after a full day of this bombardment, when Kellermann dramatically rallied his troops with that famous cry, "Vive la nation," the Prussian army refused to advance.
They just wouldn't do it.
They would move, they were demoralized, not by a charge, but by just constant, heavy shelling.
And this leads to that incredible detail we found in the sources. The Prussians were forced to retreat with what they describe as minimal French maneuvering. That's just stunning efficiency.
It's hugely significant, especially for 18th century warfare, where battles usually became these bloody, disorganized messes that were settled by costly infantry assaults.
Yeah.
Valmy was an exercise in resource maximization. Kellermann used his specialized assets, the Grabovol guns and the high ground to maximum effect, which minimized the risk to his infantry, who were still the less experienced part of his force.
It was the one without this huge, dramatic flanking move.
They won by standing firm. They won through defensive strength, perfect positioning, and superior firepower management. They just made the cost of the enemy's advance unacceptably high. Dumouriez' strategy made the battle possible, but it was Kellermann's tactical execution that made the victory so efficient.
So, when we step back and look at the big picture, what does this all mean? The victory at Valmy wasn't a fluke. It wasn't a historical accident. It was the direct result of this brilliant command synergy.
Absolutely. The victory hinges entirely on that coordination. You had Dumouriez providing the high-level strategic vision, uniting the armies, picking the battlefield, coordinating the overall line.
The big picture guy.
And then you had Kellermann providing the specialized tactical execution, securing that high ground, managing his specific sector, and then just unleashing that precise, overwhelming cannonade. If Kellermann had decided to, go it alone, or if Dumouriez had tried to micromanage the placement of every single cannon instead of trusting his expert,
it all would have fallen apart.
The synergy would have broken, and the Prussians would almost certainly have prevailed.
And then connecting that tactical win to the huge historical impact. By stopping the Prussian march, the brand new French government got the time and the confidence it desperately needed.
Exactly. This defensive victory directly preserved the revolution. Just days later, they abolished the monarchy and declared the First French Republic. It's a perfect case study of military doctrine directly enabling political survival.
So the sources show us this victory that wasn't achieved through complex, resource-draining maneuvers. It was achieved through strong defense, a clear command structure, and just maximizing the power of a single specialized asset, the artillery, from a perfect position. And this raises a really important question for you, the listener, to think about. When you face a major challenge, maybe you're coordinating a project or managing a crisis or even planning a business strategy, is success more often found in maximizing the force of one single well-positioned asset? Or is it found in these complex, resource-draining, and frankly, often confusing maneuvers?
Valmy really teaches us the profound strategic value of disciplined defense and specialized precision. Sometimes the bravest and most effective decision is just to hold your ground, trust your specialists, and fire with everything you've got.
A truly incredible deep dive into the powder smoke of 1792. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.